What's up, guys? Now, if you've been in the retro gamer space for a while, you're probably familiar with the company Hyperkin. I've talked a few times about their products in the past. I did the Retron 3 a while back, and then I've also talked about a couple of their controllers that they've released over the years. The Scout, which was the Super Nintendo controller, and the Captain, which was the N64 controller. Well, they don't just focus on Nintendo stuff, they also have released a controller for the Sega Genesis called the Squire. Hyperkin has sort of impressed me over the years. The Retron 3, I will fully admit, is kind of a lull in quality, but their controllers, I feel, are actually like really solid. So we're gonna bring you guys over to the table, we're gonna unbox this guy, and we're gonna compare it to the original Sega Genesis controller, and we'll see just how it compares. All right, let's dig in. Now, I was gonna actually do an unboxing, but honestly, there's so little you get in this guy that it's not honestly worth it. I'll just show you real quick. You get a Hyperkin sticker and this "Play well, thank you for your purchase" Hyperkin thing, little advert thing, so those can just go away. Now, what we really care about is the guy here. And I just got a comment real quick, like, this cable is like impressively long. Like, if you need some length to your cables and you don't want to go out and buy a freaking extender, you get this guy. So it actually says on the box here, it's a 10-foot cable. While I can't exactly measure it, I can say that it's significantly longer than both the cables for the 6-button controller and the 3-button controller. My 3-button controller had a particularly short cable. I mean, look at this guy. It's not very long at all, but if we compare them, like my 3-button controller ends there, and I still have all this other mess that I can use to sit wherever I want to in relation to my console, and that's always like super nice to have. And just for the sake of comparison, here it is next to the 6-button controller. If I had to hazard a guess, I'd say the 6-button controller's cable is about 6 feet long, but let's just... Okay, not quite 6, but if this Hyperkin one is a 10-foot cable, then the original one is basically an 8-foot cable. So good on you, Hyperkin, for giving us more range of playability. That's always a good thing. But let's talk about the quality of the cable itself. Now, as you can see, there is actually a decent bit of size difference. This here is the Hyperkin one, this is the original Sega one. I feel like the actual wiring inside is not going to be hardly any different. There's significantly less insulation on the Hyperkin one versus the Sega one. The Sega one just is a very stiff cable. It's actually kind of burdensome, just how it likes to hold its shape. And you can feel that it's a very stiff, very stout cable, and that can be a good thing because you're not going to have to worry about this thing fraying or tearing or breaking or whatever. But like I said, it just look at this thing, it's standing up. Like, that just can be annoying. Whereas the Hyperkin cable here, it does still kind of hold its shape, but it's a lot more pliable. It's a lot more bendable, movable. You'd be able to wrap this up a lot more easily than you would the Sega controller. And before we move on to talking about the controller itself, I was going to talk about the ends here. This is probably where Hyperkin cheaped out the most, because as you can see, like, it's a solid connector. Like, there's no give or anything. Like, I'm not worried about this thing breaking or whatever. But compare it to the Sega one, that's a chunky boy right there. That thing is solid, it's never gonna break. Albeit, yes, this is fine. The Sega one is just ridiculous. And the 6-button one here is even more ridiculous than the 3-button controller one here, which is still puts the Hyperkin one to shame. So while this is fine, it is nowhere near as ridiculously grand as the Sega controller ones. Now that that's out of the way, let's look at the controller itself. I've preached my distaste of the 3-button Genesis controller enough. This thing is ergonomically a disaster, and I don't like the D-pad. I just don't care for this controller. The 6-button controller, it's definitely an improvement. It's still not like the best in my opinion, but it is very much an improvement over this guy, and I could see using this one long term, whereas this one I don't even like holding. This guy feels like an improvement on the 6-button controller. The 6-button controller does have this raised area in the back to give your fingers a little something to hold on to. The Hyperkin one just accentuates that even further. I mean, look at this. You can get a hold of that and that thing is not going anywhere. Thankfully, they modeled this D-pad more so after the 6-button controller here versus the original controller here. This one's got nice, like, rounded edges on everything. This one here just feels sharp, and it's just, I'm gonna stop complaining about it and just know I don't know why Sega thought this was a good idea. This thing more emulates the 6-button controller here anyway, so that's the more direct comparison I should be making. So the D-pad is very similar between the two. Start button and the mode button locations are very similar places. The only difference is this guy has a bit more of an angular design, whereas this guy tends to just be kind of this boomerang shape. Now, the biggest difference in feel for these guys is actually in the buttons, the face buttons themselves. These are like, I don't want to say they're hard to press because they are just buttons. There's distinctly some additional force needed to press these buttons versus the Sega counterpart. That might just be due to the age of this guy. Like the membranes in this have been used. Like this controller is damn near 30 years old at this point and has been used. So like the membranes in here are definitely tired, you know? Whereas these guys here are very fresh. I'm not sure how well that this is gonna come across on camera, but just listen to the difference and tell me what you think. You can really hear how much extra force you have to put into this guy versus the 6-button controller. There's just a lot more force required to press these buttons. And while that does feel good, like I very much like that tactile feel whenever I'm playing games, it's just vastly different than the OEM controller, or at least it's vastly different than the OEM controller that I have. Because again, this might be like a membrane thing. The build quality of the controller itself is very solid. It is plastic, you know, but much like their other controllers, very unlike the Retron 3, this feels like a very solid plastic, because again, you know, not all plastics are created equally. This doesn't feel by any means cheap. Like I squeeze on it, there's absolutely no give anywhere. There's only the tiniest hint of flex if I try and like twist the controller. And that's just because I'm actually like putting some force on it. Like under normal use, this guy feels actually very solid and quite premium. Now, I'm not gonna pretend that some Genesis games won't make you rage and you might huck this thing across the room. I don't know if it'll stand up to that, but I try not to do that, so I'm not going to just go and throw my controller against the wall just to see if it holds up to it, you know? And it wouldn't be a controller review without giving you guys a little bit of a sound test for how all the buttons and stuff sound, so please enjoy that now. I want to show off the input lag of the controller itself. So I've got this beast set up. This thing takes so much effort to actually get set up. I've got a whole video about that, go watch it. So we got the guy here, and then we can just show you And just for the sake of comparison, I have an original Sega 6-button controller here, just to show you how it compares. Now, it's been a minute since I've used the Super Nintendo controller, but if I remember correctly, I do have a few of the similar complaints about this guy. The buttons do seem a little bit too difficult to push, but that could be down to a lot of different reasons. Particularly, these membranes are very fresh, whereas the Genesis membranes are, 30 some odd years old at this point. The truth be told, that is one of the few, if not the only gripes that I have with this guy, and can definitely recommend it if you're needing a Sega Genesis controller. Honestly, the only thing keeping me from saying go for this guy over an OEM is the price. The price gap honestly isn't that large. Obviously, you'd want to go OEM if you can, and an OEM controller right now on eBay is running right around 20 bucks after shipping. Whereas this guy is only $14 on Amazon, and that's not on sale. So this guy is cheaper, but if you're like me and you prefer getting truly authentic experiences and you want the original controllers, $5 extra is not that much of a deal to go ahead and get an original controller. But if you're just needing an extra controller and you're in your local game store and you see the Hyperkin Squire, go for it. It's a good little dude. I like it. But that's gonna be it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I look forward to bringing you even more controller reviews like this as the days go on. So again, thank you guys for being here, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one, y'all.